Hi there everybody, and welcome to lesson 7 in our series of lessons on using Google Sheets. In this lesson we're going to explore some of the other built-in functions in Sheets with which you can manipulate data. Now the data set we're going to use is a data set of education expenditure at both primary and secondary levels for all the countries in the world. This is a real live data set that I've drawn from the United Nations. Now, we've often heard it said that South Africa is one of the top education spenders in the world. Let's see if we've got the data to back that up. So take a look at the spreadsheet that we'll be working with today. Here in column A, we have a list of all the countries for which we have data. And then along the top in row 1 and row 2, we have the years for which data is available for primary education expenditure as a percentage of gross domestic product per capita, as well as secondary education expenditure, again as a percentage of GDP per capita. Now the first thing I need to do is just make sure that this data set is easy for us to work with, so I'm going to fix or freeze some rows and columns. Firstly, I'm going to freeze the first column so that as I scroll across, I'm always aware of which country's data I'm looking at. And I'm going to freeze this second row so that I'm always aware of which year's data I'm busy with. Now that we've got that done, let's take a closer look at the actual data. And the first thing I want to do is make these numbers a little bit easier to work with by rounding them up to 2 decimal places. And I want to show you 2 ways that you can do this. The first way is simply to select a number and then from the Format menu, go through Number and select Number here with 2 decimal places. Now I need you to understand that it hasn't actually changed the number in any way. All that it's done is that it's rounded the number up. The other way that you can achieve this is to use the function called round. So like all functions, we start with the equal sign. This case we're going to use round. It asks you to select the value that you'd like to round, which is this value here, and then to select the number of decimal places you'd like to round to. In this case, I want to round to 2 decimal places. And there is the rounded value of this number. Just note again that it hasn't actually changed the number. All that it's done is change the representation of how that number is displayed. Now I've gone ahead and rounded all of the numbers in my data table to 2 decimal places. Now the next thing that I want to do is I want to filter out all those countries for which there isn't really very much data. Let me show you how we're going to do that. So you can see that I've rounded all the values to 2 decimal places. But now I want to count the number of values for each country. So in other words, how many years do we have data for Afghanistan, for example? If we scroll across, we can see that, oh dear, in actual fact, we have no data for Afghanistan. But it would be really long and time-consuming as well as tedious for me to go through each country and manually count the number of data points that we have for that country. So I'm going to use the function. And the function we're going to use is called count. So I want to count the number of values in this range here. Close the brackets, and that tells us that we have 0 data values for Afghanistan. Let's autofill this down. This tells us we've got 1 data value for Albania. Let's just quickly check if that is correct. There's 1. Let's see if there's a second. No, indeed, we only have 1 data value available for Albania. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to autofill this formula all the way to the bottom. And this will do a very quick, easy count of the data values that we've got, the data points that we've got for each country in our list. You'll also notice, however, that this range of values is formatted to display 2 decimal places. Now, because we're counting absolute values, that doesn't really make much sense, so I'm quickly going to format this so that there are no decimal places being displayed. I'm going to use this shortcut function, press it twice so that now we have got 0 decimal places being displayed. Now I wonder if you noticed while I was entering in the function called count that there was another function there called count A. Let me quickly explain the difference between count and count A. The function count is specifically for numeric values. So you want to count the number of instances where there is a number present. Count A will include alphanumeric characters to that. So in other words, it's going to look just for the number of values, whether they're numbers or letters or a combination of both. Now, I want to come back to my data set, and you will have noticed that for many countries, we've got very few data points. In many cases, we've got fewer than 10 data points. Now, I want to see how we can look for those countries with more than 10 data points and just use those in our calculations going forward. Obviously, where we've got so few data points, less than 10 as an example, some of our calculations might not be very representative. So let's see how we're going to do that. You can see that there are many countries for whom we've got either no data points or only a few data points. The one way that we can do this is to format all those that have 10 or fewer data points. This is called conditional formatting. And the first thing I'm going to do is just select the values in our list. And I'm going to go to Format, Conditional Formatting. And here we've got a number of options for conditional formatting. What I want to find out is this text greater than or less than a certain number? So I'm going to conditionally format those that are less than 10. And I want to format the background color in red. We can save the rule, or in fact we can add another rule to do 2 or more conditional formatting rules at the same time. But I'm just going to save this rule for now. And we can now see that all of those cells where the value is less than 10 are now formatted in red. So this is quite a neat way that you can use to conditionally format and draw out of your data things that you want to pay particular attention to. But now there's another way that I want to show you using the COUNTIF function, which, as its name suggests, is going to count the number of values in a list or data range, but also with an if criterion. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom of my data set, and I'm going to insert that function here. So we're going to count if. The first thing it's asking for is the range. Okay, so which is the range of values that we're going to look through? We're going to look through this column of values here. And the next thing it's asking for is the actual criterion. So I want to count, see the number of entries where the value is greater than or equal to 10. Close our quotation marks, close the function with brackets, press enter, and we can now see that in this list of values, almost 215 countries, well, it's actually 213, remember, because rows 1 and 2 are taken care of. So within our data list of 213 countries, only 88 have more or equal to 10 data points in our table of values. Now, I hope you can see that we've really used 2 different approaches to solving the same problem. We want to isolate all of those countries for which we've got 10 or more data points. In the first approach, we used conditional formatting to highlight those countries where there were fewer than data points. And in the second case, we used the COUNTIF function to just count the number of countries where there are more than 10 data points. But now I want to move on to actually getting rid of those countries with fewer than data points from our data set. So what I'm going to do, as you can expect, is I'm going to want to sort on this row, this column B here, which is the count column. So let's try and do that. Select the entire data set, go through data, sort range, and I want to sort by column B. Let's see what happens. can you see now that it has sorted everything by column B, from lowest to highest, and that as per our conditional formatting, all of those countries which had fewer than 10 data points, their count value is highlighted in background red. So now it's a really simple thing for us to do to delete all of these countries from our data set. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Select all of those rows, right-click on that selection, and delete rows 3 to 127. Now I'm going to go back ahead and back to our data sort, and I just want to sort by column A again to get the countries in alphabetical order, because that often makes for easier data manipulation. Great, so now the countries are back in alphabetical order, and we can continue with our analysis of this data set. So the next step in our analysis is going to find the average educational spend, the minimum educational spend, and the maximum educational spend per country. Now, as you would expect, Google Sheets has got functions for those three things, which we're going to use. So we don't have to calculate anything manually. First step is for me to add in some additional columns, which I'm going to add into the right of our count column. The first one I'm going to use for average, second one I'm going to use for minimum, and the third one for maximum. And these functions are really easy to use. So to find the average of our data set for each country, equal to simply average, or if I could spell that correctly. Now it's just asking for the values for which you would like to calculate the average. And that's simple. It's all of these values over here. Close the function with brackets, and the average spend was 11% in that period, including both primary and secondary, for the country Andorra. We can autofill that, which we're going to do just for a little bit. I want to find the minimum value now. As you would expect, also a function. This one is called min. Open brackets, and exactly the same way, select the range of values for which we would like to find the minimum value. Close brackets, press enter. We can see we've still got some conditional formatting happening here. We'll remove that in a moment. And let's find the maximum value. Close the brackets, press enter. And so for Andorra, we can see that the average spend over primary and secondary for the period 1998 to 2011 was 11% of GDP. The minimum spend was 7%, and the maximum spend was 17%. Now, just in case you didn't realize this, we can autofill more than one cell at a time, which is what I've done. I've just selected all three cells, and Google Sheets is clever enough to understand that I want to autofill the average for the average function in this column, the minimum function in this column, and the maximum function in this column. So let me quickly autofill this all the way down to the bottom and then remove the conditional formatting. We don't really want that in place now. So all I need to do is select all the cells which might have conditional formatting on them still, and just remove the conditional formatting rule that we applied a little while ago. So I'm going to select all of these cells, go back to Format, Conditional Formatting, and you can see we can just remove the conditional formatting rule that we applied and save the rules, and that will remove all of the conditional formatting that we had in place. Okay, so now we're ready to do a little bit of simple analysis on this data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the min and the max values of the average min and max columns. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom, and I'm just going to make sure that I understand what it is I'm finding. I'm going to find the minimum and the maximum. So let's find the minimum and the maximum from the average. Equal to min, open brackets. We need to select all of those, close brackets. Now remember, I can just autofill this function across, and it'll find the minimum values within the minimum column and the minimum value within the maximum column. I want to do exactly the same thing for maximum. Let's find the maximum average, and we can autofill this. Now, this starts to tell us something really interesting. It says that, for example, the minimum average of all the countries in our list is 6, and the maximum average is 49. So there was a country that spent, on average, only 6% of GDP, and there was a country which, on average, spent 49% of GDP on education. We can also see that there's a country here that spent, in 1 year probably, 89% of GDP on education, which is an absolutely extraordinary number. Now, I want to find which country that was. And so I'm going to just use a simple Control F to open up the Find dialog. Remember, you can also find it under Edit, Find and Replace. And I'm going to look for the value of 89 and see if we can find it. Well, there's obviously one value. There's another value, 89. That must be it. 2001, Vanuatu spent 89% of its GDP on, in this case, secondary education. That's quite an extraordinary number. Now, I don't know whether you noticed something a little bit awkward about that Control F to find the value of 89 in our spreadsheet. Obviously, what that's going to do is it's going to look through the entire spreadsheet and return any string with 89 in it. Have a look how many strings it found. Can you see that it found 15 instances where the string 89 was found? Now, that might be a little bit cumbersome if you have to look through all 15 and try and identify the value that you're specifically after. Fortunately for us, it was quite easy to find because there was the 89 in the max value, so we knew it immediately it was Vanuatu. But there is a simpler way to do this, and it's a really useful function called VLOOKUP. Now, I just need to explain how VLOOKUP works before we use it. What VLOOKUP, that function VLOOKUP, allows you to do is to take a column of data and look up a value within that range based on a specific value within the first column of that range. Let me show you how it works. So the function is called VLOOKUP. Let's just quickly practice here. So VLOOKUP, vertical lookup, we're going to open up the brackets. And the first thing it's asking you to do is the search key. Now that is the thing that it wants you to, that you want the program to search for. The next thing it's going to ask for is the range. So that's the range of values within which you want that search key looked for. Here comes the really interesting part, index. Let's read it together. The column index of the value to be returned where the first column in the range is numbered 1. Now this is really important to get. If you've got a few columns of data, VLOOKUP assumes that the first column in that range is column 1. And if you've got another 4 columns of data, so you've got 5 columns altogether, the first column is index 1, the second column is index 2, index 3, index 4, index 5, etc. So if you want a value returned in the third column, you need to use index 3. Can you also see that, unfortunately, VLOOKUP works in a data range of columns from left to right. So what I want to do is I want to look up where the maximum education spend, in this case was 89, which country that belonged to. So can you see that my VLOOKUP is not going to work exactly as my data is laid out? Let's just make sure that we all understand why. If I were to select these columns, can you see that country is going to be index 1? And actually, I need the maximum to be index 1. So before I can apply VLOOKUP, I need to copy this column of data and paste it inside or between columns E and what was F. So this is the new column F. Now I can do my VLOOKUP. Now I just want to make sure that everyone understands exactly why I had to move the countries to the right of the set of values that we were going to look through. Let's go through that one more time. VLOOKUP requires us to select a number of columns of data, and the way that VLOOKUP works is that it selects through the first column of data in that range and then returns matching values in any of the successive columns, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4, etc. Now, because this is the column of data that I want to do the lookup in, I need to make sure that the countries are to the right of that so that they can be either index 1 or, in this case, index 2. So let's do our VLOOKUP. So equal to VLOOKUP. First thing I need to enter is the search key. What value is it that I'm searching for? I'm searching for the value of 89. What range do I want to look through to find that value of 89? Well, I want to look through this range here. And which column do I want to return if I find the value in the first column of my range? Well, we can see that that is column 2. Close. And can you see that we don't get the expected value? Now, the reason for that is because I wasn't very clever by specifying an absolute value in my VLOOKUP. Remember, it's always better to specify cell references. So let's go and change that 89 into a cell reference. So inside my VLOOKUP, I'm going to take 89 out, and instead I'm going to look for the value that is inside that cell, 89. Press enter, and we can see that it returns Vanuatu as expected. Let's do that one more time now to find the average spend for South Africa. So let's write it down here. Without looking and finding South Africa within our whole spreadsheet. So let's do that one more time. Equal to VLOOKUP. The search key that we want to find is this time South Africa. The range that we want to look through is this range over here. So it includes country, count, and average. Okay, so that is A3 to C90. But in this case, can you see that I want to find the value in the third column? Column 1 in the range, column 2 in the range, column 3 in the range over here. So this is index 3. Close my brackets. And there, the average spend for South Africa during this period was 16% of GDP. Now, before we finish, let's just make sure that that value is in fact correct if we go back to our spreadsheet and manually find the value for South Africa. So we'll scroll up here to find South Africa. We've gone past it. There's South Africa. Average spend is indeed 16%. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed that lesson. Join us for the last lesson in this series of presentations on Google Sheets, where we will look at how we can graph data that's in a spreadsheet. Until then, bye-bye.